الكارثة الإنسانية اللي مرق فيها صيدا. نحن بدنا الجيش، بدنا القوى الأمنية تمسك.
Good afternoon. It is Thursday, June 27th. I'm Yumna Naufal, and these are today's headlines. The army launches a broad crackdown on supporters of Sheikh Ahmed Assid after its intelligence services uncover a list naming his supporters and financiers. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry hails efforts made by President Michel Sulaiman to maintain stability in Lebanon. And UN-appointed inspectors blocked from entering Syria are in Turkey to gather information about possible use of chemical weapons. The army has launched a broad crackdown on supporters of radical preacher Sheikh Ahmed al-Assid after its intelligence services uncovered its list naming his supporters and financiers, as the army's death toll from recent fighting has risen to 20 soldiers. The list of contacts contains the names of Assid fighters, as well as dozens of media personnel, teachers, activists, youth, and students, and documents linking different entities to Assid, according to military sources. The names of Assid's bankrollers were also uncovered. The documents included maps of targets that Assid had identified as part of a campaign to inflame sectarian tensions, and calling the fund a valuable treasure. The army also confiscated large amounts of weapons and ammunition from Assid's security perimeter around the Bilal bin Rabah Mosque in the southern suburb of Abra in Saida. Joining us now to discuss the matter further is political analyst Carol Malouf. Welcome, Carol.
Thank you, Yumna.
Many Saida residents are expressing concern in the aftermath of the army's decisive victory that the widening campaign of arrest would include individuals who simply pray at the mosque. So what do you think the role of the army should be right now?
First, we have to be clear. Al-Asir's movement is nothing but a minority of the Saida and its suburbs residents. They do not make the majority of the inhabitants. Saida is has a majority of moderates from all sects who live in Saida along with Asir. So somehow Asir and his movement have hijacked Saida over the past 2 years. Asir has been threatening for a long time to take some kind of action and military action and to move against the Hezbollah apartments, as he said, that have been for a while. There has been some clashes between Al-Asir supporters and people residing from Hezbollah, as he says, in these apartments. So the people have been listening to Asir for a long time, and I believe that the army should have, and the security apparatus should have probably done something about it a while ago. Now, going back to the events of the weekend, we, Yumna, perception is reality. And people, a part of the Lebanese community, perceive the army as being biased into cracking down on a certain community, which is the Sunni community, and not on the rest of the illegal weapons in the country.
Why is there this belief, though, Carol? What makes it so that this belief is actually common? A lot of people believe the army is very much pro-Hezbollah. Am I correct?
Yes, well, you see, first it's been a series of events that have been taking place. There were some events in Akkar with the killing of the two sheikhs, which stirred some violence among the Sunni ranks. And then there is the crackdown on the Sunnis in Tripoli. Again, this is all perceived by people. But then on the other hand, you find that a young demonstrator, Abbas Hashim, was, Al-Hashim, the guy who was demonstrating in front of the Iranian embassy. Yes.
Right.
He was demonstrating and he was killed in broad daylight. We have pictures of the perpetrators circulating on the on social
so what
media.
Do you think? So what do you think is going on? What is going on right now?
I think that the army and the president at this point should be very careful in how they approach this matter, because The Sunnis are really upset with what is happening. If you also look at social media and if you talk to people on the streets, there is this resentment that the army is not being equally dealing with matters and with weapons, outside the state apparatus and security forces. And if you also look at the Hezbollah's implication in Syria, I mean, the borders are open.
Okay, I just want to cut you off further because we're going to talk about Syria in a little bit. I just want to give a little bit of background information on Asir. While often labeled a Salafist, primarily because of his appearance, this has been rejected by both traditional Salafists in the north of Lebanon and by Asir himself, who said last week that he was just a Sunni cleric who can bring together the political and religious rhetoric, which is appealing to the people. Hailing from a mixed background, his mother is a Shia from the south of Lebanon and his father is a Sunnah from Saida. He grew up surrounded by musically oriented people, with his father being a singer and his brother an avid oud player. Asir made headlines at the start of 2012 with his fiery rhetoric against the Syrian administration and his denouncement of Hezbollah for being an ally of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and for holding weapons inside Lebanon. And speaking of Hezbollah, well, they vacated several apartments today, as Carol was saying, in the area of Abra in Saida, handing them over to the Lebanese army 3 days after gun battles turned the city into a battle zone. The apartments, which lie meters from the Bilal bin Rabah mosque compound in which Al-Asir was a preacher, were one of the main reasons for the fierce campaign launched by him against Hezbollah in the first place. The army and security forces on Tuesday launched a manhunt for Asir after clashes between his soldiers and his supporters left around 18 troops dead. The military consolidated its grip on Saida after overrunning the cleric's mosque complex late on Monday, but Asir remains at large. Back to you, Carol. Here's my following question. The clashes in Saida, well, the army revealed several dozen caches of heavy weaponry hidden within the mosque itself of Asir, and there's been speculation that such a quantity of weaponry could not be based on local funding alone. So who do you think is funding Asir and his supporters?
First, my question would be at this point, why weren't these apartments vacated before all this happened? And again, I go back to my initial point that Asir has been calling for these apartments to be vacated. So this is a question to ask the army. Why did we wait for all these people, to die and for all this battle to happen inside that to vacate these apartments? That's aside. Now, in terms of funding, we hear a lot of speculation about Asir being a product of Hezbollah, or Asir has been funded by Qatar or by the Saudis or by the Syrians. Today we have to be very clear. We have a war taking place at our northern border. The borders are open, and sympathizers of Asir are present. There is the Salafi movement, and weapons could be flowing freely in and out of the country.
So if weapons are flowing freely, Hezbollah is armed, we know, and if the weapons are, flowing freely with the Sunnis, are you afraid that the repercussions could be that there could be a sectarian strife, which is what a lot of people are talking about, between Sunni and Shia in the country?
I think weapons are being flown back and forth by both parties, by Hezbollah and by the Sunni elements. Let's take this conversation back to where it should be. There is a state, there is a Lebanese state, and the Lebanese state should be dealing with all its subjects equally. So if the army and the security apparatus do not deal with all members of the Lebanese community with weapons, illegal weapons, outside the government apparatus and security forces, the government and the army should crack down on them equally. This is the perception, and that this is not happening. And one segment of the Lebanese community is being seen as using, if you want, the army to crack down on the others. So it's like proxy using the army in between.
Okay, speaking of security, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has hailed efforts made by President Mosheh Sulaiman to maintain stability in Lebanon, and he says Washington continues to support the Lebanese army. Kerry's remarks came in a telephone conversation with Sulaiman, according to a statement from the presidential palace. It said Kerry stressed his country's continued support for the Lebanese army, which proved to be the sole guarantor of stability and civil peace, as well as combating terrorism. And he offered condolences to Sulaiman over the death of the soldiers in the weekend clashes. The statement from Abdel Palace also said, Kerry, that it affirmed Washington's support for Lebanon in various fields. Now, speaking of security, the U.S. State Department reiterated this week the travel warning advisory to Lebanon over safety and security concerns. And the British Foreign Ministry issued also a travel advice warning its nationals from heading to several areas in the country that have witnessed unrest. So what do you think of the current security situation?
I think there are concerns about the security situation. You know, in order to have a proper functioning security apparatus in the country, you need also a political cover or a political umbrella. Usually the political cover is the government. Today we have a lot of flaws, if you want, in our political system. There is a caretaker government which is unable to take care of the proper security measures in the country. There is a PM designate who is unable to call on for a government. The army general will be going on retirement in 2 months. So the president is there for another 9 months. There is no parliament to appoint or elect a new president. So you know there is a political vacuum. It trickles down to the security apparatus, and then the security level trickles down to the ground. So unless you deal with it comprehensively with the political situation as a whole, I think we are heading towards a decline in the security situation.
Okay, well, we'll be back. Coming up next, do we blacklist Hezbollah? Yes or no? That's the question. We'll be back with Carol Malouf for more after the break. Welcome back. The European Union is unlikely to make a decision on blacklisting Hezbollah for at least 5 or 6 months, according to Italy's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs for Development Cooperation, Lapo Pistelli. As he rounded out a 3-day visit to the country with a brief tour of the National Museum, which included sneak peeks at a selection of exhibits not yet on public display, he said, and he listed the debate between member states over evidence of Hezbollah's involvement in a terror attack in Bulgaria in July 2012 as one of the main reasons he believes the organization, or part of it, would not be added to the bloc's terror list in the immediate future. Pistelli described the debate as very sensitive, and he made clear that regardless of discussions in Europe, Hezbollah is a very relevant player in Lebanon and could not be excluded from a real national unity government. So, Carol, I want to go back to you. Pistelli said that in order to form a national unity government, Hezbollah cannot be left out because the Shias represent a relevant part of the country. So, what do you think? How is the next government? How should it be formed?
The president and the prime minister designate Tamam Salam have called on to form a national salvation government. Now, there are some parties in Lebanon who insist, like Walid Jumblat, insist that Hezbollah be represented. In my opinion, I think a government of national salvation of technocrats, as they call them, people experts in their field who are not politically affiliated at the moment, is the answer to your question. That does not mean that you are boycotting Hezbollah. It means that the state has taken a decision to take an equal distance from all the parties, all the political parties at play, and try to maintain whatever is left of the legitimacy of the current state apparatuses and institutions that are still functioning until today, and try to keep the country moving in legitimate ways. There are solutions. There are ways where you could name a few Shia members and people of other sects, because we know that we need
that
to
are
keep
not
the
Hezbollah
balance.
related, or they are Hezbollah related?
No, they don't. Not all Shia in Lebanon are in Hezbollah or with Hezbollah. I can name a list of brilliant experts in their fields if we're talking about a government of technocrats who would be able to deal with subjects related to their fields of expertise, at least to move to the next level.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us. That was political analyst Carol Malouf with us talking about the current situation in the country.
My pleasure. Thank you.
UN-appointed inspectors blocked from entering Syria are in Turkey to gather information about possible use of chemical weapons in the civil war, according to officials. Members of the team assembled by UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon had been on standby in Cyprus since April, unable to enter Syria as Western governments accuse Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's forces of chemical weapons attacks. The Syrian government and rebels fighting it have accused each other of using lethal chemical agents, including sarin gas, in the two-year-old conflict, where more than 100,000 people have been killed in what is known as the longest and most violent of the recent Arab uprisings, according to the British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. This ends our special newscast for today. Let me remind you of our headlines. The army launches a broad crackdown on supporters of Sheikh Ahmed Assid after its intelligence service uncovers a list naming his supporters and financiers. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry hails efforts made by President Michel Sleiman to maintain stability in the country. And UN appointed inspectors blocked from entering Syria are in Turkey to gather information about possible use of chemical weapons. Those are your headlines for this Thursday. Have a very good night from Beirut. I'm live. Yumna Naufal. Bye.
كل الناس بدنا الزيت، بدنا الرؤى الأمنية يتم